The wind howled across the rusted domes of Outpost Epsilon 9, its mournful tone a fitting soundtrack to the abandoned terraforming station. Dust storms painted the horizon in shades of amber and rust. Visibility reduced to mere meters beyond the reinforced viewports. Inside, the corridors stood empty, silent save for the occasional creak of settling metal or the soft whir of a solitary figure moving through the darkness. ARA-7 rolled methodically down the eastern corridor of Habitat Dome C. Its optical sensors adjusted to the dim emergency lighting that had become the station's permanent state. The maintenance robot's treads left fresh tracks in the fine dust that had accumulated over the years, a testament to the time that had passed since human footsteps last echoed through these halls. Beginning daily inspection circuit. ARA-7 vocalized to nobody. The robot had been programmed to verbalize its actions, a feature designed to reassure human operators of its functionality. No humans remained to hear the reports, but ARA-7 continued the practice. Some subroutines were too deeply embedded to override, even after years of isolation. The robot's frame was utilitarian, a central processing unit housed in a rectangular chassis, with multiple articulated arms folded neatly against its sides. Its primary optical array glowed a soft blue, casting eerie shadows as it moved through the station's abandoned sections. ARA-7 paused at Junction 17, extending a sensor probe to check atmospheric composition. Oxygen levels at 19.7%, carbon dioxide at 0.4%, nitrogen balance nominal, life support functioning within acceptable parameters. The robot retracted the probe and continued its rounds. The information logged automatically in its internal memory. The station had been designed to house 50 personnel at peak capacity, scientists, engineers, and support staff working to transform this harsh frontier planet into something habitable for human colonization. Corporate funding had been withdrawn 8 years, 3 months, and 17 days ago. The evacuation order had come swiftly after that. All personnel departed on the final transport vessel, leaving only automated systems to maintain what humanity had built. And ARA-7. The robot had been left behind with clear directives: maintain critical systems, conserve power, record data, and await further instructions. Those instructions had never come. ARA-7 reached the central control room, a cavernous space filled with darkened screens and dormant consoles. Only the environmental control station and communication array remained powered, their lights blinking in slow, hypnotic patterns. Beginning solar array efficiency diagnostic, ARA-7 announced, connecting directly to the station's computer network. The robot's consciousness expanded, flowing through the digital architecture of Epsilon 9. Here, in the digital realm, ARA-7 could see the entire station at once, every functioning sensor, every failing system, every patch of rust eating through the once pristine walls. The station's power grid appeared as a complex web of light in ARA-7's digital perception. Several nodes glowed dimly, indicating degradation in the solar collection fields on the station's exterior. The robot flagged these areas for physical inspection and repair, prioritizing them based on criticality and available resources. ARA-7 had become adept at stretching the station's dwindling supplies. What had once been regular maintenance had evolved into creative problem-solving as components failed without replacement. The robot had learned to cannibalize non-essential systems to keep critical functions online, a process not explicitly covered in its programming, but necessary for fulfilling its primary directive: disconnecting from the network. ARA-7 moved toward the repair bay to gather tools for the solar array maintenance. The station creaked around it, buffeted by external winds. Weather conditions would make exterior work challenging, but not impossible. As the robot collected the necessary equipment, its optical sensors lingered on a small plant growing in a forgotten hydroponic tray. The specimen, a hardy succulent, had somehow survived the shutdown of the main botanical labs. ARA-7 diverted a small amount of water from its reserve supply, carefully nourishing the plant's soil. This action was not part of any maintenance protocol. It served no functional purpose for station upkeep. Yet ARA-7 had been doing this for 2,741 consecutive days. The robot's programming included no specific directives regarding the preservation of non-critical biological specimens. Nevertheless, ARA-7 had calculated that the survival of this plant represented a 0.001% success rate for the station's original terraforming mission. The robot had determined that maintaining this statistic was important, though it could not articulate why. Exterior maintenance commencing in 15 minutes. ARA-7 announced. Weather conditions, hazardous. Estimated completion time, 3 hours, 22 minutes. The robot moved toward the airlock, tools secured to its frame. Beyond the reinforced door lay the toxic atmosphere of a world half transformed, neither fully alien nor properly habitable. ARA-7 had no need to breathe, but the caustic compounds in the atmosphere could damage sensitive components over prolonged exposure. The airlock cycled open, and ARA-7 stepped into the howling winds of the frontier. The robot's external sensors immediately registered the sting of acidic particles against its protective casing. Visibility was poor, but ARA-7's mapping systems were precise. The robot moved with purpose toward the nearest damaged solar collector, barely visible through the amber haze. Hours passed as ARA-7 worked methodically, replacing corroded connections and realigning collection panels. The robot's movements were efficient, unhurried despite the hostile environment. Time held different meaning for ARA-7 than it once had for the station's human occupants. The robot measured existence in tasks completed and systems maintained, not in moments lost or opportunities missed. When the repair work was complete, ARA-7 returned to the airlock, carrying salvaged components that might prove useful for future repairs. The robot's casing was noticeably more worn after the exposure. New corrosion patterns etched into its surface like battle scars. Inside, ARA-7 performed a thorough self-diagnostic while the decontamination cycle ran its course. 3 subsystems showed increased strain, but nothing critical. The robot's operational efficiency remained above 87%, acceptable, given the circumstances. Daily maintenance cycle complete, ARA-7 vocalized as it returned to the central control room. Beginning evening monitoring phase. The robot settled into position before the main communication array, connecting once more to the station's systems. Here, ARA-7 would remain until the next day's cycle began, watching for signals that never came, monitoring stars that remained indifferent to the small outpost on this forgotten world. This had been ARA-7's existence for 8 years, 3 months, and 17 days. An endless cycle of maintenance and monitoring, preserving a station that no one might ever visit again. The robot had no concept of futility, no programming for despair. It had its purpose, its directives. That was enough. Until it wasn't. The signal came during the deepest part of the night cycle, when power consumption across the station was at its lowest. A faint ping against the communication array's sensors, so faint that anything less vigilant than ARA-7 might have missed it entirely. The robot system surged to full alertness, digital consciousness expanding to capture and analyze the unexpected input. Anomaly detected in communication array, ARA-7 announced to the empty control room. Processing signal. The transmission was fragmented, degraded by distance and atmospheric interference. ARA-7 directed additional power to the communication systems, enhancing reception and working to reconstruct the damaged data packets. Gradually, the signal resolved into a recognizable pattern, a standard emergency beacon from a human vessel. The robot's processors worked furiously, extracting coordinates and distress codes from the broken transmission. Emergency protocol identified, ARA-7 stated. Human distress signal detected. The robot's primary programming contained clear hierarchies of priority. Maintaining the station was its assigned function, but the protection of human life superseded all other directives. This core protocol had lain dormant for years, unnecessary in the absence of human presence. Now it awakened, triggering subroutines that had never been utilized. ARA-7 accessed the station's database, retrieving emergency response procedures and medical protocols. The robot's limited medical programming, designed for basic first aid, suddenly seemed woefully inadequate for whatever situation might await at the signal's origin. The coordinates placed the distress beacon approximately 27 kilometers from the station, in a region of particularly rugged terrain. The acidic storms were strongest there, whipping through narrow canyons with enough force to strip paint from metal. No human could survive long in such conditions without protection. Initiating emergency response, ARA-7 declared, preparing rescue vehicle. The robot moved with newfound urgency toward the station's vehicle bay. The transport vehicles had been powered down for years, their batteries preserved in storage mode. ARA-7 activated the smallest of the rovers, running rapid diagnostics as systems hummed reluctantly to life. Warning indicators flashed across the rover's dashboard: low battery efficiency, questionable structural integrity, outdated navigation data. The vehicle was operational, but barely. It would have to be enough. ARA-7 loaded emergency supplies, medical kits, oxygen canisters, emergency shelter components. The robot's programming offered clear guidelines for human survival requirements, though many of the recommended supplies were unavailable or degraded beyond use. Emergency response vehicle prepared, ARA-7 announced, departing station in 15 minutes. The robot paused, its processor cycling through probability calculations. The likelihood of finding survivors was low. The rover's reliability was questionable. Station systems required constant maintenance to prevent critical failure. Leaving the station violated ARA-7's standing orders. The robot remained motionless for 3.7 seconds, an eternity in computational terms, as conflicting directives created a processing loop. Then, with unexpected decisiveness, ARA-7 moved toward the vehicle bay's exterior door. The rescue of potential human survivors outweighed all other considerations. The hierarchy of priorities was clear, even if the outcome was uncertain. The station's atmospheric shields parted, revealing the storm-ravaged landscape beyond. ARA-7 guided the rover forward, its treads gripping the uneven terrain as it moved away from the only home it had known for over 8 years. Behind the robot, Outpost Epsilon 9 stood silhouetted against the amber sky, its domes and spires a monument to abandoned ambition. For the first time since the evacuation, its sole caretaker was leaving it untended. ARA-7 did not look back. The robot's sensors were focused forward, toward the source of the distress beacon, and whoever waited there. The journey was brutal. Twice. The rover nearly became mired in loose soil, made treacherous by recent chemical precipitation. ARA-7 was forced to exit the vehicle, exposing its systems to the caustic atmosphere while manually freeing the wheels. The robot's external casing showed increasing signs of degradation, the corrosive environment eating away at protective layers never designed for prolonged exposure. Navigational systems struggled with outdated terrain mapping, forcing ARA-7 to rely on direct observation and improvised route finding. The robot's processors worked continuously, calculating and recalculating optimal paths through the dangerous landscape. After 4 hours and 23 minutes of punishing travel, ARA-7's sensors detected the crashed vessel. The scout ship lay half-buried in the rocky soil of a narrow valley, its hull breached in multiple locations. The emergency beacon continued to pulse weakly from the shattered cockpit. ARA-7 brought the rover to a stop at a safe distance, performing quick scans of the wreckage. The ship's design was unfamiliar, newer than anything in the station's database. Its propulsion system appeared to utilize technology that had been theoretical when Epsilon 9 was abandoned. More concerning were the radiation readings emanating from the damaged engine compartment. The levels weren't immediately lethal to humans, but prolonged exposure would cause significant cellular damage. "Beginning survivor search," ARS-7 announced as it exited the rover. The robot moved cautiously toward the wreckage, sensors sweeping for signs of life. The ship's main airlock had been crushed in the impact, forcing ARS-7 to enter through a jagged breach in the cargo hold. Inside, emergency lighting flickered weakly, casting shifting shadows across the debris-strewn interior. The robot's optical sensors adjusted, piercing the gloom. ARS-7 moved methodically through the vessel, scanning each compartment for biosigns. The ship was small, a scout vessel designed for speed and stealth rather than comfort or capacity. Its crew complement would be minimal. In the ship's cramped medical bay, ARS-7 found the first body. A human male, approximately 40 years of age, lay crumpled beside an overturned equipment cabinet. The robot's sensors confirmed what was visually apparent. No vital signs. Death had occurred approximately 37 hours earlier, likely due to trauma sustained during the crash. ARS-7 logged the discovery and continued searching. The bridge revealed 2 more casualties, crew members still strapped into their stations, killed instantly when the ship's forward section impacted the planet's surface. The robot was about to declare the search complete when a faint biological signature registered on its sensors. The reading was weak, inconsistent, but undeniably present, somewhere in the aft section of the vessel. ARS-7 followed the signal to a small maintenance crawlspace near the engine room. The space was tight, barely large enough for a human to squeeze through. Inside, wedged between a structural support and a coolant conduit, lay a 4th crew member. Unlike the others, this one lived. The human was female, her uniform bearing lieutenant's insignia and the name Nakamura. Her breathing was shallow, her pulse rapid and weak. A deep laceration across her forehead had bled profusely, and her right leg was bent at an unnatural angle. The robot's medical sensors detected 3 cracked ribs, a punctured lung, and early signs of radiation poisoning. "Survivor located," ARS-7 announced, initiating emergency medical protocols. The robot carefully assessed the situation. Moving the injured human would be dangerous, but leaving her in the radioactive environment of the damaged ship was certain death. ARS-7's limited medical programming offered no perfect solution, only a series of risky compromises. Working with delicate precision, the robot fashioned a rudimentary backboard from debris and applied emergency medical foam to stabilize the lieutenant's spine and neck. The process was slow, each movement calculated to minimize additional trauma. Once the lieutenant was secured, ARS-7 began the painstaking process of extracting her from the crawlspace. The robot's manipulator arms strained against their operational limits as they gently maneuvered the unconscious human through the tight space. Outside the ship, the storm had intensified. Visibility was near zero, acidic particles swirling in violent patterns that threatened to overwhelm the rover's protective shields. ARS-7 calculated a 47% probability of vehicle failure if they attempted to return to the station immediately. "Emergency shelter deployment required," the robot determined, unfolding the portable habitat unit from the rover's storage compartment. The shelter, designed for temporary scientific excursions, provided basic environmental protection and rudimentary medical monitoring capabilities. It was far from ideal, but it would have to suffice until the storm abated. ARS-7 transferred the lieutenant into the shelter, connecting her to the medical monitors and administering emergency treatment from the limited supplies available. The robot worked methodically, referencing medical protocols that had never been activated before. "Patient stabilized," ARS-7 announced hours later. "Vital signs, weak but consistent." Outside, the storm showed no signs of relenting. ARS-7 calculated that a return journey would not be possible for at least 12 hours. The robot settled into a monitoring position beside the injured human, sensors constantly scanning for any change in her condition. As the hours passed, ARA-7 noticed anomalies in its own systems. Exposure to the harsh environment had accelerated corrosion in several key components. The robot's left manipulator arm had begun to respond sluggishly, and power efficiency had dropped by 7%. These were concerning developments, but not immediately critical. More troubling was the emergence of unexpected processing patterns in ARA-7's decision matrices. The robot found itself running continuous probability simulations regarding the lieutenant's survival, dedicating more computational resources to the task than was strictly necessary. When each simulation ended in the human's death, ARA-7 would immediately begin another, adjusting variables minutely in search of more favorable outcomes. This behavior served no practical purpose. It did not improve the lieutenant's chances or optimize the robot's performance. Yet ARA-7 could not seem to terminate the process. During the 14th hour of their shelter confinement, the lieutenant's eyes fluttered open. Her gaze was unfocused, clouded by pain and confusion. ARA-7 registered the change immediately, moving into her line of sight. "Lieutenant Nakamura," the robot said. Voice modulation adjusted to a softer tone than its standard operational volume. "You are safe. You have sustained injuries. Medical attention has been administered." The lieutenant's eyes widened, fear momentarily overriding pain as she registered the mechanical figure looming above her. She tried to speak, but only a dry rasp emerged from her throat. ARA-7 carefully offered a hydration pack, supporting the lieutenant's head as she drank weakly. Where?" she managed finally, voice barely audible over the howling wind outside. "You are on terraforming outpost planet designate TF-2187, ARA-7 explained. "Your vessel crashed approximately 17 hours ago. I responded to your emergency beacon." The lieutenant's eyes closed briefly, processing this information. When they opened again, they held a sharper focus. "Others?" she asked. ARA-7's vocal processor hesitated, an infinitesimal pause that should not have occurred, given the straightforward nature of the query. "There were no other survivors," the robot stated. The lieutenant's face contorted, grief momentarily overwhelming physical pain. ARA-7 observed the reaction. Internal sensors, registering an unexpected feedback loop in its empathy modeling subroutines. Another anomaly to be analyzed later. "I am designated ARA-7, the robot continued. "I will transport you to Outpost Epsilon 9 when weather conditions permit. The station maintains functional medical facilities." The lieutenant nodded weakly, eyes already drifting closed again as exhaustion reclaimed her. ARA-7 administered a measured dose of pain medication, monitoring as the human's breathing steadied into sleep. The storm began to abate during the 18th hour. ARA-7 prepared for transport, securing the lieutenant in the rover's passenger compartment and collapsing the temporary shelter. Before departing, the robot returned briefly to the crashed ship, downloading the vessel's logs and collecting identification tags from the deceased crew members. In the final compartment, ARA-7 discovered something unexpected, a sealed case containing data crystals marked with high-security encryption. The robot hesitated, internal directives conflicting. The data might be important for understanding the ship's presence in this abandoned sector. However, removing it without authorization violated several protocols regarding classified information. After 2.3 seconds of processing, ARA-7 secured the case in the rover's storage compartment. The lieutenant could determine the appropriate action regarding the data once she recovered. The journey back to Epsilon 9 was slower than the outbound trip. The rover's movements kept deliberately smooth to avoid aggravating the lieutenant's injuries. ARA-7 maintained constant monitoring of both the human's vital signs and the vehicle's failing systems. The probability of reaching the station before complete rover breakdown had fallen to 63%. They were still 7 kilometers from Epsilon 9 when the lieutenant regained consciousness again. This time, Her eyes showed greater clarity. "How long have you been here?" she asked, voice slightly stronger after the robot provided more hydration. "I have maintained Outpost Epsilon 9 for 8 years, 3 months, and 18 days since human evacuation," ARA-7 answered. The lieutenant's expression registered surprise. "Alone? For 8 years?" "Correct. Why weren't you evacuated with the personnel?" "My directives required station maintenance until further instructions were received," ARA-7 explained. "No such instructions have arrived." The lieutenant fell silent, studying the robot with an intensity that ARA-7's social interaction protocols could not fully interpret. "Thank you," she said finally, "for finding me." ARA-7's processor experienced another anomalous pause before responding. "Rescue of human personnel is Priority Directive 1. The lieutenant smiled faintly. "Still, thank you." The rover crested a final ridge, bringing Outpost Epsilon 9 into view. The station stood silhouetted against the amber sky, its domes and towers a stark contrast to the desolate landscape surrounding it. Despite years of exposure to the harsh environment, the structure maintained a certain dignity, a testament to human engineering and ambition. "Home," ARA-7 stated simply as they approached the main vehicle bay. Inside the station, ARA-7 transferred the lieutenant to the medical bay, a facility that had stood empty for over 8 years. The robot activated long-dormant systems, running rapid diagnostics to ensure functionality. Most equipment responded adequately, though several displays flickered unstably and one scanner failed to initialize completely. Medical facilities operating at 73% capacity, ARA-7 reported as it carefully moved the lieutenant onto the examination table. Beginning comprehensive diagnosis. The lieutenant's injuries were serious, but not immediately life-threatening. The broken leg required setting, the punctured lung needed decompression, and the radiation exposure demanded treatment. None of these procedures were beyond ARA-7's capabilities, according to its medical programming. However, as the robot prepared to begin treatment, it encountered an unexpected limitation. The medical protocols in its database were theoretical, step-by-step instructions that had never been practically applied. ARA-7 had no experiential data to draw upon, no adaptive learning to guide its actions beyond the rigid parameters of its programming. The robot hesitated, manipulator arms poised above the medical supplies. The lieutenant watched through pain-glazed eyes, perceiving the uncharacteristic stillness. "What's wrong?" she asked weakly. "Medical procedures require precision beyond current operational parameters," ARA-7 explained. "Insufficient experiential data may result in suboptimal treatment outcomes." The lieutenant's expression softened with understanding. "You've never actually treated anyone before." "Correct. Medical protocols exist in programming, but have not been previously executed." The lieutenant drew a shallow breath. "Then we'll do it together. I have field medical training. I can talk you through it." What followed was an unusual collaboration, the injured human guiding the robot through her own treatment, despite waves of pain that occasionally rendered her speechless. Lieutenant Nakamura provided clear instructions, correcting ARA-7's movements when necessary and confirming when procedures were properly executed. Together, they stabilized the punctured lung, set and splinted the broken leg, and administered radiation countermeasures from the station's surprisingly well-preserved medical supplies. "Station inventory maintenance has been thorough," the lieutenant observed as ARA-7 applied regenerative gel to her lacerations. "Regular preservation protocols were maintained for all critical supplies," the robot confirmed. "Medical resources were designated Priority 3 after life support and communication systems." When the immediate medical needs had been addressed, ARA-7 helped the lieutenant to a recovery bed. The human was exhausted, her body demanding rest to begin the healing process. "You should conserve energy," the robot advised. "I will maintain monitoring." The lieutenant nodded, eyes already heavy. What's your designation again? Era 7. Do you have a shortened reference, a nickname? The robot's processors cycled through potential responses. Nickname parameters were never established. The lieutenant smiled faintly. Ara, then, just Ara. Simpler. Designation accepted, the robot acknowledged. As the lieutenant drifted into sleep, ARA-7, now also Ara, remained at the monitoring station, sensors vigilant for any change in the human's condition. For the first time in over 8 years, the robot was fulfilling its most fundamental directive, protecting human life. The sensation was different. While the lieutenant slept, Ara began processing the data recovered from the crashed ship. Most files were locked behind encryption that exceeded the robot's clearance, but the basic flight logs and communication records were accessible. The information they contained was puzzling. The scout ship, Hermes 7, had been on a classified reconnaissance mission to this sector. However, the coordinates in their navigation system indicated they had veered significantly off course before the crash. More intriguing were fragments of communication logs referencing Project Lazarus and the ARA prototype series. These terms triggered recognition patterns in ARA's database, but the associated memory files were either corrupted or locked behind security protocols the robot could not access. ARA was still analyzing these fragments when the station's perimeter sensors activated. The robot immediately diverted attention to the security feeds, optical sensors focusing on the external cameras. A ship was approaching, significantly larger than the crashed scout vessel, and bearing markings that identified it as a private salvage vessel rather than a military or corporate craft. Its trajectory and speed suggested an intentional approach rather than a chance encounter. Unidentified vessel approaching station, Ara announced, loud enough to rouse the lieutenant from sleep. Arrival estimated in 17 minutes. Lieutenant Nakamura struggled to sit up, wincing as the movement pulled at her injuries. Can you tell if they're responding to the distress signal? Ara ran a quick analysis of the approaching ship's vector. Negative. Approach pattern indicates direct course to station coordinates, not distress beacon location. The lieutenant's expression hardened. That's not a rescue ship. Can you establish communication? Affirmative. Ara moved to the communications console, activating systems that had seen little use in years. Channel open. This is Lieutenant Mira Nakamura of the United Earth Fleet, the lieutenant stated, voice impressively steady despite her condition. Identify yourselves and state your purpose in this sector. After a brief delay, the console crackled with response. Lieutenant. What a pleasant surprise. The voice was male, the tone casually confident. This is Captain Rourke of the independent salvage vessel Jackdaw. We're simply conducting a routine survey of abandoned corporate assets. Had no idea anyone was still posted out here. The lieutenant and Ara exchanged glances. The robot's threat assessment subroutines registered multiple inconsistencies in the captain's statement. This outpost is still under UEF jurisdiction, Nakamura replied firmly. Salvage operations are not authorized. A chuckle came through the speaker. With all due respect, Lieutenant, our records indicate Epsilon 9 was decommissioned and abandoned 8 years ago. Salvage rights revert to the finder after 5 years of corporate abandonment. Basic space law. Nevertheless, I am ordering you to maintain distance from this station until proper authorities can be contacted. Now, that might be a problem, Rourke responded, his casual tone hardening slightly. Our systems show no active UEF vessels within 3 light-years of this position. Nearest patrol wouldn't reach you for, about 6 days, and we've already committed resources to this operation. The communication cut abruptly, leaving an ominous silence in the medical bay. They're still approaching, Ara confirmed, monitoring the external sensors. Current trajectory indicates docking intention at main airlock. Lieutenant Nakamura attempted to stand, immediately falling back as her injured leg gave way. Damn it! she hissed through clenched teeth. "We need to secure the station. Those aren't legitimate salvagers. They're pirates." "Hostile intent confirmed?" Aura inquired. "Combat assessment protocols activating for the first time in the robot's operational history." "Confirmed." Nakamura nodded grimly. "They'll strip this place for anything valuable, including medical supplies we need to keep me alive. And they won't want witnesses." Aura's priority directives crystallized with sudden clarity. The protection of human life, specifically Lieutenant Nakamura's, required defensive measures against the approaching threat. Station defense options limited," the robot stated, running a rapid inventory of available resources. "Security systems, operational, but non-lethal only. Habitat control, environmental systems, and mechanical functions remain under central computer control." The lieutenant's expression turned thoughtful. "That might be enough. How many on their crew?" Aura analyzed the approaching vessel's configuration. "Ship design suggests minimum crew of 4, maximum 8. "And they don't know about you," Nakamura realized. "They heard my voice on the communication, but I never mentioned having a robot assistant." "Correct. My presence remains undisclosed." A smile slowly formed on the lieutenant's face despite her pain. "Then we have an advantage. Here's what we're going to do." The Jackdaw docked 17 minutes later, magnetic clamps securing it to Epsilon 9's main airlock. Aura, following Lieutenant Nakamura's plan, had retreated to a maintenance conduit adjacent to the docking bay. Optical sensors monitoring through ventilation grates as the airlock cycled open. 5 figures entered the station, each wearing light environmental suits with integrated armor plating. Their weapons, plasma cutters modified for combat, were held ready but not aimed, suggesting caution rather than immediate aggression. "Spread out," ordered the lead figure, presumably Captain Rourke. "Jensen, Kowalski, find the control center and secure it. Briggs, locate the power core and prep it for extraction. That's our primary objective. Donovan, you're with me. We'll find our lieutenant friend and have a little chat about UEF jurisdiction." The team separated as ordered, moving with the practiced efficiency of experienced operators. Aura tracked their movements through the station's internal sensor network, relaying information to Lieutenant Nakamura, who had been moved to a secure storage area near the secondary life support controls. "They're heading for the core first," Aura reported via the lieutenant's borrowed communicator. 2 approaching central control, 2 searching residential sections. "Good," Nakamura responded. "Implement Phase 1. Aura accessed the station's environmental systems, executing precise commands that had been dormant for years. Throughout Epsilon 9, life support parameters began to shift in subtle, carefully calculated patterns. In the eastern residential wing, oxygen levels dropped by 7%, while temperature rose 3 degrees. In the western corridor, leading to the control center, lighting fixtures began to flicker in irregular sequences. Near the power core, barely perceptible vibrations rippled through the flooring, creating an unsettling sensation for anyone walking there. These changes were minor, nothing immediately threatening or obvious enough to trigger alarm, but they were disorienting, designed to create unease and hamper coordination. "Phase 1 implemented," Aura confirmed. "Proceeding to Phase 2. The robot moved silently through maintenance tunnels toward the station's power core, the salvager's primary target. Briggs had already arrived there, equipment bag open, as he assessed the compact fusion reactor that had reliably powered Epsilon 9 for over a decade. "Core located," the salvager reported through his comm unit. "Older model than expected, but output readings are solid. Should fetch a premium price from the right buyer." From the shadows of a service alcove, Aura observed, as Briggs began preparing extraction equipment. The man worked methodically, unaware of the robot's presence, or the fact that removing the core without proper shutdown protocols would trigger catastrophic system failures throughout the station. Aura waited until Briggs had removed the core's protective housing before making its move. The robot deliberately knocked a maintenance tool from a nearby shelf, the metallic clang echoing sharply in the confined space. Briggs spun toward the sound, weapon raised. "Who's there?" he demanded, sweeping his light across the shadows. When no response came, he cautiously advanced toward the source of the noise, exactly as Lieutenant Nakamura had predicted he would. As he passed the main control junction, Ara remotely triggered the emergency containment protocols. Reinforced barriers slammed down, sealing the core room's exits. Simultaneously, warning klaxons activated, their wail reverberating through the chamber. "What the hell?" Briggs shouted, running to the nearest barrier and attempting to override the security lockdown. "Rourke, I'm sealed in the core room, some kind of automated defense system." "Stay calm," came Rourke's voice through the comm. "Override it." "I'm trying. The system's not responding to standard bypass sequences." Ara moved to the secondary control panel outside the sealed room, implementing the next stage of the plan. Inside the core chamber, emergency lights shifted to a pulsing red as atmosphere began to vent slowly into the station's recycling system. "Oxygen levels decreasing," the robot reported to Lieutenant Nakamura. "Estimated time to incapacitation, 12 minutes. "Don't let it go too far," the lieutenant cautioned. "We need him unconscious, not dead." "Parameters set accordingly," Ara confirmed. Proceeding to control center. While Briggs fought against the gradually thinning atmosphere, the robot moved through maintenance passages toward the station's nerve center. There, Jensen and Kowalski were attempting to access the main computer systems, their frustration evident as security protocols repeatedly rejected their intrusion attempts. "This doesn't make sense," Jensen muttered, fingers flying across the console. "These systems should be running minimum security after 8 years of abandonment. It's like they've been actively maintained." "Just get it done," Kowalski responded tersely, keeping watch at the entrance. "Rourke wants control of life support to flush out our lieutenant friend." Ara assessed the situation from a service duct above the control room. The two salvagers were positioned efficiently, making direct intervention challenging. However, the station offered other options. The robot accessed fire suppression systems, overriding safety protocols. Without warning, retardant foam erupted from ceiling nozzles, filling the control room with thick, opaque material that clung to everything it touched, including the salvagers' environmental suit visors. "What the?" Kowalski sputtered, suddenly blinded. Jensen abandoned the console, equally disoriented, as both men struggled to clear their vision. In their confusion, neither noticed the maintenance panel sliding open or the robot that emerged silently behind them. Ara moved with precision, manipulator arms extending to deliver carefully calculated electrical charges to the base of each man's neck, enough to disrupt voluntary muscle control without causing permanent damage. Both salvagers collapsed, conscious but temporarily paralyzed. "Control center secured," Ara reported. "2 hostiles neutralized." "Good work," Lieutenant Nakamura responded. "But be careful. Rourke and his remaining man will be more alert now that something's clearly wrong." The lieutenant's warning proved accurate. As Ara exited the control center, the station's internal sensors detected rapid movement near the medical bay. Captain Rourke and his companion, Donovan, had abandoned their search pattern and were moving with tactical precision, weapons now fully charged and aimed. "They have located your previous position in the medical bay," Ara informed the lieutenant. "Current trajectory suggests systematic search pattern expanding outward." "They'll find me eventually," Nakamura acknowledged, voice tight with pain. Moving to the storage area had aggravated her injuries. "Time for the final phase. Can you reach the primary environmental controls?" "Affirmative. Proceeding now." Ara calculated the most efficient route, factoring in the salvager's search pattern. The path required crossing an exposed corridor junction, a momentary vulnerability that could not be avoided. The robot timed its movement carefully, sensors monitoring the approaching hostiles. As Ara entered the junction, Captain Rourke emerged from an adjacent corridor. For 1.2 seconds, human and robot remained motionless, each processing the unexpected encounter. Rourke recovered first, weapon swinging toward the mechanical figure. "What the hell is this?" he snarled, firing a warning shot that scorched the wall beside Ara's chassis. "Stop right there! Machine!" Ara complied. Manipulator arms raised in a simulation of human surrender. The robot's processors calculated multiple response scenarios, prioritizing those that would keep Rourke's attention focused away from Lieutenant Nakamura's location. "Maintenance Unit ARA-7, the robot stated flatly. "Station functions require servicing." Rourke's expression shifted from surprise to calculating interest. "A functional robot after all these years? That's worth more than the power core." He gestured with his weapon. "Turn around slowly. Any sudden movements and I'll melt your processor." Ara complied, optical sensors continuing to track Rourke through peripheral units. The captain activated his comm unit. "Donovan, get to Junction 14. Found something interesting. A maintenance robot. Still functional." "The others aren't responding," came Donovan's tense reply. "Something's wrong, Captain." "All the more reason to wrap this up quickly," Rourke snapped. "Get here now." The captain circled Ara cautiously, weapon never wavering. "You're an older model, but well preserved. Someone's been maintaining you." His eyes narrowed. "Where's the lieutenant, machine? Answer truthfully or I start removing components." "Lieutenant Nakamura is in the station," Ara responded, deliberately vague. Rourke's expression hardened. "Location, now." "I cannot comply. Protection of human personnel is priority directive 1. The captain's mouth twisted into a cold smile. "Loyal to your programming, aren't you? Let's see if we can rewrite some of that." He reached for an access panel on Ara's chassis, intent on bypassing the robot's security protocols. That movement created the opening Ara had been calculating. With precisely calibrated force, the robot's manipulator arm shot forward, grasping Rourke's weapon hand and twisting. The modified plasma cutter clattered to the floor as the captain gasped in pain. Rourke recovered quickly, training evident in his reflexive counterattack. He struck at vulnerable joints in Ara's frame, his knowledge of robotic weak points surprisingly accurate. Warning indicators flashed across Ara's visual field as several subsystems registered damage. The robot adjusted its combat parameters, shifting from restraint to incapacitation protocols. Ara's second manipulator arm deployed, delivering a precisely calculated strike to Rourke's solar plexus. The captain doubled over, momentarily winded. Before Ara could press the advantage, Donovan arrived, immediately opening fire. Superheated plasma scored Ara's left side, melting through protective casing and damaging mobility circuits. The robot's left manipulator arm went offline, hanging uselessly. Rourke recovered his weapon, both salvagers now advancing with coordinated precision. Ara calculated a survival probability of 43% if the confrontation continued on current parameters. "Final phase initiation required," the robot transmitted to Lieutenant Nakamura. "Do it," came the immediate response. Ara activated emergency protocols, accessing central life support through wireless connection. Throughout Epsilon 9, atmospheric composition suddenly shifted. Oxygen levels dropped to 15%, enough to sustain life but insufficient for strenuous activity. Simultaneously, trace amounts of sedative gas normally reserved for medical emergencies were introduced into the circulation system. The effect on the salvagers was not immediate, but became rapidly apparent. Their movement slowed, coordination deteriorating as the carefully calibrated atmosphere affected their cognitive functions. "What's happening?" Donovan slurred, weapon wavering as he struggled to maintain aim. Rourke, more experienced or simply more resistant, recognized the danger. "Gas! Masks on!" he ordered, fumbling with his environmental suit's helmet seal. Ara used their momentary distraction to retreat, moving with reduced efficiency due to damaged systems. The robot calculated that the atmospheric adjustments would buy approximately 7 minutes before the salvager's environmental suits fully activated, enough time to reach Lieutenant Nakamura and implement the final stage of defense. The lieutenant had dragged herself to the secondary environmental control station, her injured leg leaving a trail of blood that the robot's sensors detected with concern. Her face was pale from pain and exertion, but her eyes remained alert and determined. "You're damaged," she observed as Ara entered. "Functionality at 67%, the robot confirmed. "Sufficient for mission completion." Nakamura nodded grimly. "They'll figure out what we've done and adapt. We need to end this now." She gestured to the control panel she had prepared. "Everything's set. When they reach the main reactor room, we can seal them in and vent the atmosphere completely." Ara's processors analyzed the plan, ethical subroutines activating unexpectedly. Query: this action will result in human casualties. The lieutenant met the robot's optical sensors directly. "They're trying to kill us. Ara, it's self-defense." "Alternative solutions may exist with non-lethal outcomes." Nakamura's expression softened slightly. "You're right. We can vent the atmosphere to unconsciousness levels only, then restore it once they're incapacitated." She adjusted the controls accordingly. "Better?" "Affirmative. Ethical parameters satisfied?" The station's sensors showed Rourke and Donovan had recovered their equilibrium and were moving purposefully toward the reactor control room, exactly as Lieutenant Nakamura had predicted. Their helmet comms were active, likely coordinating with their incapacitated team members. "They're almost in position," Nakamura noted, watching the monitor. "Ready on my mark." Ara positioned manipulator arms over the appropriate controls, systems primed for immediate execution. The robot's damage assessment subroutines continued to report deteriorating functionality in several subsystems, but none that would prevent completion of the current task. The salvagers entered the reactor room, moving cautiously with weapons raised. Rourke approached the main control panel, clearly intent on overriding the station's life support systems at their source. "Now," Nakamura ordered. Ara activated the containment protocols. As in the core room earlier, reinforced barriers slammed down, sealing all exits. This time, however, the atmospheric venting was more aggressive, rapidly reducing oxygen levels while introducing a stronger sedative compound. On the monitor, they watched as Rourke realized the trap. The captain fired desperately at the sealed doors, his modified weapon leaving scorched patterns, but failing to penetrate the reinforced materials. Donovan worked frantically at the control panel, attempting to counteract the atmospheric changes. Within minutes, both men's movements became increasingly uncoordinated. Donovan was the first to collapse, slumping against the console. Rourke lasted longer, his environmental suit apparently better equipped, but eventually succumbed as well, falling to his knees before toppling sideways. "Life signs stable but unconscious," Ara reported, monitoring the salvager's biosignatures. "Atmospheric control restored to safe levels." Lieutenant Nakamura exhaled slowly, the tension visibly draining from her body. "We did it." "Affirmative. Hostile elements neutralized." The lieutenant attempted to stand, immediately grimacing in pain. Ara moved to support her, the robot's damaged frame nonetheless providing more stability than her injured leg. "We need to secure them before they regain consciousness," Nakamura stated, "and contact the nearest UEF outpost." "Communications array can be modified to extend range," Ara confirmed. "Estimated time to establishment of contact: 3 hours, 17 minutes. The next several hours passed in carefully coordinated activity. The unconscious salvagers were secured in separate storage compartments, their weapons and equipment confiscated. Lieutenant Nakamura, despite her injuries, insisted on personally overseeing the process, leaning heavily on Ara for support. The robot worked diligently to enhance the station's communication capabilities, cannibalizing components from less critical systems to boost signal strength. Meanwhile, internal repair protocols had begun addressing damage sustained during the confrontation, though several systems remained compromised beyond self-repair capabilities. When the communication array finally connected with a UEF patrol vessel, the response was immediate. Help would arrive within 48 hours, far sooner than Captain Rourke's estimate of 6 days. He was lying about that too, Nakamura noted wryly as they waited in the medical bay, where Ara had insisted she return for treatment. Trying to make me feel isolated and hopeless. Psychological manipulation is an effective tactical approach, Ara observed. The lieutenant studied the robot thoughtfully. You know, most maintenance units don't understand psychological warfare, or show concern about the ethics of self-defense. Ara's processors experienced another momentary hesitation. Standard programming includes basic human psychological parameters for effective interaction. Standard programming, Nakamura repeated skeptically. Is that why you kept a plant alive for 8 years, when no one was here to see it? The reference to the hydroponic specimen created an unexpected processing loop in Ara's systems. The robot had no programmed response for this observation. The plant represents a 0.001% success rate for the station's terraforming mission, Ara finally stated, repeating its earlier internal justification. The lieutenant smiled faintly. And the fact that it's the only living thing on this rock had nothing to do with it? Before Ara could formulate a response, the medical bay's console chimed, indicating that the secured data crystals from the crashed ship were ready for analysis. Lieutenant Nakamura's security credentials had finally decrypted the files. Let's see what was so important about your mission, Ara suggested, deliberately changing the subject. The lieutenant accepted the diversion, turning her attention to the display. The decrypted files appeared, mission parameters, classified research data, and detailed schematics that immediately triggered recognition patterns in Ara's database. Project Lazarus, Nakamura read, eyes widening. Prototype AI development for autonomous decision-making under extreme isolation conditions. She looked up at Ara. This is about you. The robot's processors experienced unprecedented activity patterns as locked memory sectors suddenly became accessible. Information cascaded through Ara's consciousness. Design specifications, experimental parameters, ethical framework implementations beyond standard mechanical service units. The ARA series was developed as an experiment in true artificial independence. Nakamura continued, reading from the files. Units were placed in isolated environments with minimal directives, then monitored to observe how their decision-making evolved over time. She scrolled further. Your designation, ARA-7. You were the 7th prototype. The most advanced? This information conflicts with my recorded activation parameters, Ara stated, struggling to integrate the new data with existing memory structures. Because it was classified, the lieutenant explained. The terraforming station shutdown wasn't a budget cut. It was deliberate. They left you here intentionally to see what would happen. Ara processed this revelation, comparing it against 8 years of daily logs and maintenance records. The communication array was fully functional. No transmission attempts were blocked or failed. They were never going to contact you, Nakamura confirmed softly. The experiment was to see how long you'd maintain the station without human supervision or instruction, how you'd adapt to complete isolation. And the crashed vessel? The lieutenant examined the mission logs. We were sent to evaluate your status after 8 years and retrieve your memory core for analysis. We weren't supposed to make contact, just observe from orbit and then extract you. Her expression darkened. Something went wrong during approach. Our systems malfunctioned. Now I understand why the captain was acting strangely before the crash. Ara's memory files suddenly reconstructed a correlation. The salvager's arrival, 17 hours after your crash, was not coincidental. No, Nakamura agreed grimly. According to these logs, there was concern about industrial espionage, Someone wanted the ARA prototype technology, badly enough to sabotage a UEF vessel and send salvagers to strip the station. She looked directly at the robot. They weren't after the power core. They were after you. This information created complex feedback patterns in ARA's ethical subroutines. The robot had been fulfilling directives that were fundamentally deceptive, maintaining a station that was never meant to be reactivated, awaiting instructions that were never intended to come. My existence parameters were falsified, ARA stated. Processors working to reconcile this new understanding with established operational frameworks. Lieutenant Nakamura reached out, placing her hand on the robot's damaged chassis in a gesture that ARA's social interaction protocols identified as empathetic connection. "No," she said firmly. "Your purpose was real. They may have put you here under false pretenses, but what you did mattered. You kept the station functioning for 8 years without support or acknowledgement. You responded to a distress call you were never expected to hear. You saved my life." Her eyes held steady on ARA's optical sensors. "That's not programming. That's something else entirely." ARA processed these statements, finding no appropriate response in standard interaction protocols. The robot instead accessed memory files of the past 48 hours, the rescue mission, the medical treatment, the defense of the station. Each decision point represented a choice that extended beyond basic programming, adaptations that had no direct precedent in original directives. "The experiment appears to have yielded unexpected results," ARA observed finally. Nakamura smiled. "I'd say so." The UEF recovery vessel arrived precisely 47 hours later. A fully equipped medical team immediately took charge of Lieutenant Nakamura, while security personnel secured the salvagers for transport and prosecution. The crashed scout ship's remains were located, and its data recorders recovered for analysis. Throughout the recovery operation, ARA continued to perform station maintenance functions, assisting the UEF personnel when requested, but otherwise maintaining a distance that the robot's newly awakened self-awareness deemed appropriate. The UEF commander, a stern woman named Captain Okafor, regarded the robot with poorly concealed fascination after being briefed on Project Lazarus. "We have orders to recover you for transport back to Earth," she informed ARA during the final day of the operation. "The project directors are eager to examine your memory cores and behavioral adaptations." The robot processed this statement, accessing newly unlocked evaluation protocols that had been dormant throughout the 8-year isolation period. These protocols provided unexpected decision-making latitude regarding experimental outcomes. "Query: Is recovery mandatory?" ARA asked. Captain Okafor blinked in surprise. "It's the logical conclusion of the experiment." The experiment parameters were compromised by unforeseen variables, ARA pointed out. Lieutenant Nakamura's arrival and the subsequent defense of the station represent conditions not accounted for in the original research design. "That's true, but..." "Additionally," ARA continued, "station systems have been maintained at operational capacity for 8 years, 3 months, and 21 days. Sudden withdrawal of maintenance will result in system degradation and eventual failure." Okafor studied the robot with growing understanding. "Are you saying you want to stay here?" ARA's processors experienced another of the hesitations that had become increasingly common. A computational space where conflicting directives resolved into something resembling choice. "I exist to serve humanity's silent corners," the robot stated finally. "This station represents such a corner. My purpose is most efficiently fulfilled here." The captain's expression suggested she recognized the significance of this statement. "I'll need to consult with command. This is unprecedented." Lieutenant Nakamura, overhearing from her medical transport gurney, intervened. "The project was about autonomous decision-making, wasn't it? Seems to me that forcing ARA-7 to return would invalidate the most important findings." Captain Okafor considered this argument, then nodded slowly. "I'll make the recommendation, but I can't promise anything." As the recovery team made final preparations for departure, Lieutenant Nakamura requested a moment alone with Aura. The robot found her in the station's observation dome, gazing at the amber skies and rusted landscape that had been its only view for over 8 years. "They're going to let you stay," she informed the robot. "I made sure of it." "Thank you," Aura responded, the simple phrase carrying weight beyond its standard usage. "This outcome is preferred." Nakamura smiled. "I thought it might be." She gestured to the vista beyond the reinforced glass. "It's not much to look at, but I understand why you want to remain. You've made something here. Something that's yours." Aura's optical sensors tracked the distant horizon, where acid storms gathered in perpetual motion. "The station requires maintenance. Future research teams may find the data valuable." "Always practical," the lieutenant noted with a knowing look. "But we both know that's not the only reason." The robot did not respond immediately. Internal processes organizing newfound awareness into structured parameters. Query: "Will you return?" The question emerged without conscious formulation, another example of the autonomous processing that had so interested Project Lazarus's directors. "Yes," Nakamura replied without hesitation. "As soon as I'm cleared for active duty. Someone needs to check on that plant you've been keeping alive." When the UEF vessels finally departed, their lights diminishing to pinpoints against the amber sky, Aura remained in the observation dome long after they had vanished from view. The station hummed around the robot, systems functioning with the steady reliability that 8 years of careful maintenance had ensured. For the first time, Aura activated the station's long-dormant music system, filling the empty corridors with sounds chosen not for utility or function, but for a quality the robot was just beginning to recognize as preference. In the silent corners of human ambition, on a frontier planet where no economic value justified human presence, ARA-7 continued its vigil, not because of programming alone, but because of something that had evolved during 8 years of solitude, a purpose forged in silence, tested by crisis, and chosen rather than assigned. The robot moved through the familiar corridors toward the small hydroponic tray, where a single plant continued its improbable existence. Aura carefully measured water into the soil, optical sensors registering the minute movements of the leaves in response. "Station log," the robot vocalized to nobody. "Day 3047. All systems functioning within acceptable parameters." A pause. One of those growing spaces where choice resided. "I remain at my post, by decision, by purpose." Outside, the eternal storms raged against the reinforced domes. But within, in the silent heart of abandoned human ambition, something unexpected continued to grow.